basically what I studied, I started studying the North American church. The statistic, there were two statistics that alarmed me. One was that 3% of churches in North America grow through evangelism, 3%. So out of the 350 some thousand churches, 80% were plateaued and declining. And 17% who were growing, it was just through migration of believers. So just let that sink in, 3% of churches. The other statistic was that something like, more than a majority of students who leave high school to the university will lose their faith. There have been lots of statistics that are unfounded, 90%, 80%. I think it's safe to say that a majority of people, more than 50%, will be faithful youth group attenders. And when they get to the university, then they'll lose their faith.
Yeah.
So anyway, I really started out to that was my first motivation. That was troubling me. And later, I began to write the book, God's Not Dead, to kind of chronicle the evidence for God, because I've seen students lose their faith. And then I was driving down the road in New Orleans, and a friend of mine said, so what are you doing? I said, I'm writing a book called God's Not Dead, because people are losing their faith when they get to college. He said, man, that needs to be a movie. So he brought the movie company to me, Pure Flix, and they ended up here to Nashville, and then they followed me around UCLA. And so I met with the screenwriters and just basically explained all the issues that go on the campus. And then my friend paid for the movie, so I didn't realize it was going to be what it's become. Some people hate it, some people love it, but it's gone all over the world, many languages, and then there's been several. It'll probably end up being like Fast and Furious, or Rocky. But that's been fun. But really, my doctoral work focused on the 3%. Why are only 3% of churches growing through evangelism? So I spent 4 years deconstructing that. And when I came to the end of that, I ended up writing my doctoral thesis on the gift of the evangelist. Now, when I wrote that, it was believed to be the first doctoral dissertation in the world on that gift.
Wow.
Hundreds and thousands have been done, hundreds and possibly thousands have been done on evangelism, but none on the gift of the evangelist. Now, I'm a member of the Billy Graham Center for Evangelism with Ed Stetzer. So when I talked about this, I'm a fellow there. All these different evangelistic leaders from denominations kind of begin to, talk about it. We think there couldn't be. So they came up with one other one that had been written in 1989, which I was happy with. I said, okay, I had the second. I am second. So that shows you the lack of understanding of the gift of the evangelist.
Right.
And so when I wrote that dissertation, published it in 2010, the essence of what I was saying was that the evangelist is missing from the local church context. Most evangelists are the caricature of just doing the big event, the crusade, or whatever you want to call it. But in terms of just like you have a youth pastor, or you have an executive pastor, or a tech person, what does it mean to have an evangelist in the local church team?
Wow.
And so what we did was I began to analyze our movement, our churches, and realized as an evangelist that basically because we had the evangelist at the very foundation of our churches and campus ministries, and those evangelists were catalysts, that actually that group were equipping the rest of the people. So the essence is this: our research says that evangelists are about 1%. So if you have a church of 1,000, there's 10. And so if you can identify that 1% first, train them, then they will equip the other 99% of people who aren't evangelists. So for instance, we'll do an evangelistic training on a Saturday morning, and I'll just tell the pastor or campus leader, I said, look, don't make a big deal about it. Don't try to publicize it. Just get up and say, hey, anybody interested in evangelism, learning how to share the faith, come Saturday morning. Usually about 10 to 15, 20% at the most will come.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay, because we're not trying to get everybody to come. We're looking for the 1%. So the ideal sweet spot is to get the 10% of people who are probably have a heart for evangelism. And then by the end of that Saturday morning, after 3 hours, we've kind of distilled that down to explaining, okay, here's what it means to be an evangelist. And so we begin to talk about that. And so at the end of that 3 hours, we have identified that 1% for the most part. And then we train them and consult them. And then next thing you know, that 1% begins to equip the 10% who showed up at that Saturday morning. Now, what most people do is they say, we're going to get out and share our faith. Come on, we're going to meet every Saturday. And then all these people show up, and then slowly it digresses down to 1%. So you end up with a 1%, but it's so discouraging over the weeks to see everybody leave that then people just think it's not working. So if you start small, anything I say today is if you'll identify those evangelists. So I had to give data. I can't just say the Lord told me this. So, I had to give the data. So really, we have the data for this of when you've identified the evangelist, the growth of churches. I mean, we have a church, we have, several hundred churches, but I could go down the list and show the data of churches that have identified the evangelist and how they have grown through evangelism, not through migration, but from baptisms and stuff. So whether it's a church of 200, I went into a large church in Texas, 30,000 identified, 700, evangelists. So that was about 2%. And then 8,000 attended over we had to break it up into 4 sessions. And they're beginning to see their church grow through evangelism. And the pastor of a church that large said, I have to admit, we've grown mostly through people being attracted to our programs, to our worship. But I've seen churches of 200, where they can say, well, maybe 2/3 of our church has been baptized, or we've led to Christ. So whether it's a church of 200, whether it's a campus ministry, if you identify the evangelist first. So my doctoral dissertation, if you can go to Engage Resources. You can download it. But it gives the, kind of the layout, the simple plan of how you can identify those evangelists first, and they will equip the rest of the body to share the gospel.